Ever heard of the rule of 168? 168 is the total number of hours each of us gets in any given week. No more, no less. We've been conditioned to think that what separates the ultra successful from those of us who are just barely scraping by is what we do with those 168 hours. And while there's an element of truth to that, after we subtract out 7 nights of sleep and a 40-hour work week, we're actually left with anywhere between 72 to 86 hours of pliable time. But that doesn't take into account the work that goes into just making it through the week. The meal preparation, the laundry, the commute, the errands, the children rearing. Dovetail this very real lack of hours with a hustle culture that promotes the side gig and praises productivity. And it is no wonder why time poverty is on the rise. On this episode of Think Significantly, the finale for our second season, we're going to talk about why time poverty is more magnified than ever before, the socioeconomic factors that exacerbate time poverty, and what really separates the ultra successful from those of us just squeaking by. Hello, everyone. My name is Melissa, and as always, I am joined by my co-host, Pete. Hello to everyone.
Well, hello, Melissa. Hello to our listeners. Hello to people who aren't listening that should be. I'm going to welcome everyone I can think of right now.
It's like you put that on your what's it? Your vision board.
That's right. That's right.
Thinking.
That's right. So many people that should be listening.
Well, they probably are feeling overwhelmed right now by all of their to-do lists. So they're like,
I bet you if they had just a little bit more time, they would be here with us right now.
And if they listen to this podcast, they would figure out how to make more time potentially.
It is a tragic loop.
As are most things in life, right?
Yes. That's right.
Yes. So full disclosure, I am recording this episode while wearing my hustle sweatshirt. I made sure I grabbed it so that I could be true to my word. And I am absolutely one of those people who has drank the rise and grind Kool-Aid. And I will tell you, it has taken me years to go, is this really how I want to live my life?
Well, working grueling hours is part of the American ethos. That's that Protestant work ethic. You're feeding the capitalistic machine with your one full-time and 3 or 4 or 5, I lost track of your part-time side hustles. We really can't have you thinking that you might want to balance in your life, Melissa.
Right. Don't think, just do. Yes, I've been doing that for years.
That's right.
Right. Just head down under the wire.
Mm-hmm.
You're just low crawling. Yes.
That's how they get you.
That's how they get you. Well, I don't think that there is anyone listening today that hasn't experienced time poverty, him or herself. It's our practice to start off with a formal definition. So time poverty is defined as the chronic feeling of having too many things to do and not enough time to do them in.
Right. And while we might be really feeling it now or recognizing it now, maybe more than ever, I read that time poverty actually started in part due to the recession in 2008, when the economic climate was really kind of dour, and it made younger workers feel like the only way to be successful was to work long hours or start a side business or both.
Yes. And I do believe it's referred to as the Great Recession.
Yes. Sorry. Yes. Right.
As opposed to our shitty recession,
right.
Quasi-recession
right. As
of
opposed to the bad recessions. That was a great recession.
Right. If there was a good one, that was it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But as you already noted, being productive and resilient, is very glorified in our American culture, right?
Oh, yeah. It sure is. Yeah. Putting in extra hours is honestly too often an expectation, right? Many salaried employees, especially those in management, legal profession, engineering roles, they all work over 45 hours a week at their full-time jobs. And I just read a survey that said that 25% of Americans have a side gig in addition to their day job. And of those, yeah, a quarter, right? And of those, 10% work 15 to 20 hours on that. So a 40-hour full-time job plus 20 hours on the side gig.
Yeah.
And while a good chunk of those people are making their side hustle their hobby or their passion project, there's a lot of folks that do it just to keep the bills paid.
Yeah, I believe that, especially now in the not so great
right,
quasi-recession.
right, in
Yes.
the recession that is just on the precipice.
Right. Yes. So, what's interesting about your first point about, lots of those fields require just expect 45 hours out of you.
Mhm.
Isn't that really just an extension of credential creep, which we just talked about last week? Right. You got full-time employees like burning the midnight oil to get raises or promotions, or simply just to avoid being laid off. Right. To
That
be like, I'm here, boss. Like,
right. I think there's definitely a correlation that can be sussed out there between those two concepts, because those folks, they don't feel like they have a choice but to put in the long hours in their respective industries or at their company. 60-hour weeks seem like the only way to climb the corporate ladder.
Oh, sure. Or it's just that that's the amount of work that there is, right? Like I experience time theft at my day job too, right? I'm like, how is this possible? Like, how can you possibly get all this work done in this amount of time in 40
Yeah.
hours? Well,
Yeah.
you
No,
can.
right. That's definitely so in some of my positions, that's definitely been the case too, right?
So this week I read a infographic that said that people are concerned, like present day
Mhm.
about the optics of working from home. So even though like we're moving toward this trend where remote work is becoming more of like the status quo, people are concerned about it because they imagine that people won't see them as working as diligently as if they were in the office.
Mhm.
And I had to think to myself, if this is why the average workday during the pandemic increased by 48 minutes, right? In those early phases of lockdowns, people were working more. And perhaps it's because you're just getting used to the Zoom, you're just trying to figure it all out and balance everything. But I think there might be some level of I'm trying to demonstrate an elevated level of commitment, because
Mhm.
people assume that if you're working from home, you're doing all these other things at home too. And
Right.
and usually the most I ever did was like throw a load of wash into the dryer. I tell you, as soon as I went back to work to the office, I was like, God, we waste a lot of time at the office.
Yeah. No,
It's
for
like
sure. Yeah.
I was like, don't stop by and talk to me. Keep it moving. Keep
Right.
it moving.
Right.
Yeah.
Not to be overly thematic, but to
Mhm.
tie in what we've talked about this month, if you're suffering from imposter syndrome and you're
Yes.
somebody who requires a lot of feedback, working from home is awful.
Yes.
It's awful.
Awful. So
And
true.
and talking to your, the longer days, the examples you gave are certainly relevant, but it might have just become easier to continue working past the end of the workday, or
Right.
maybe that's not the right way to put it. Maybe it's harder to differentiate when it was time to stop, right? Many of
Right.
us require that change in physical space to
Mhm.
change from work mode to home mode.
Oh yeah.
So if you're not ever leaving home, you're not ever actually leaving the office either.
Right.
Yeah, and since you didn't have a 30-minute commute, why not start your workday while the kids are still asleep when you would have been climbing in the car? And
Right.
then you can work uninterrupted for a while.
Right. So also you don't have that, oh God, I have to leave because so and so needs to get practice like during the pandemic,
Right.
right?
That's a
It
great
just
point.
it just kept
Yeah.
going.
You don't have
Right.
that impetus that I need to go get my kids from school. That's a fantastic point. I didn't even think of that.
So when you're talking too about, or when we're talking about, the workday getting longer and just the ways that it does that, I don't think anyone will be unfamiliar with the notion that the proportion of unpaid work being done in addition to the paid labor during the pandemic went through the roof because you
Mhm.
don't have the daycare or the school help shoulder some of that. I'm just going to be frank, that child rearing load that we were used to, right?
Sure.
You
Yeah.
you are taking it all on.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the pandemic absolutely magnified time poverty by removing many support systems previously available for parents, and in some cases, adding additional responsibilities such as grocery shopping for elderly neighbors.
Mhm.
And while the pandemic certainly illuminated time poverty and in many cases made it worse, this is not a new thing whatsoever.
No.
Right? In 2012, about 50% of working Americans reported they were always rushed, and 70% never had enough time. In
Mhm.
2015, more than 80% said they didn't have the time they needed.
Right, and I'll let you, extrapolate out where we could be, what is it, 7 years later
Yeah, right.
about how
Oh,
many
yeah,
people would be reporting
right.
that they
This is
didn't have
all
enough
all
time.
all pre-pandemic, pre like the true like onslaught of social media. Like
Yes.
it's this certainly hasn't gotten any better.
No, definitely not. So, I know we started off with how we've taken to working more, but as Pete alluded in the beginning, as I did more and more diving into this topic, I found out that we are really just skimming the surface on what time poverty is all about. There are so many ingredients that go into time poverty, so many causes, and we're going to share those with you now.
It's really such a thought-provoking topic, and it has such an effect on, I'm going to say so many people, but really I feel like everyone,
Hmm.
that I'm really surprised that it's not a common talking point for everyone. Like, it's amazing to me how few people know that time poverty is a concept.
Right. They experience it, but they don't know it has a name.
Right.
So, the first one that I wanted to start off with is that there is a lot of idle time that is incorporated into our work days.
Mm,
And idle time is defined as involuntary periods of downtime when employees cannot perform their work tasks. So, you experience this sometimes when you're moving between meetings, it's like just enough time to not be able to do something else, or like you
uh-huh.
didn't have that logbook with you, or you didn't have your laptop, or you needed to go back to your office for that thing and you can't.
Right.
So you end up eating that time basically.
I kind of always equated that to, like the high school experience where you have the bells and you have just
Yeah.
enough time to get from class to class.
Right. But imagine like you have 7 minutes to get to a class across the hall. So now
Right.
you're eating 6 minutes of that. That
Mhm.
goes
Mhm.
unaccounted for. Like you can't do anything with that time. Whereas if you just had a bunch of 6 minutes lined up, maybe you'd have a full hour where you could
Right.
be productive. But yeah,
Sure.
so the workspace contributes to this. There was an investigation that looked at 1,000 employees across 29 occupations. And turns out this is like rampant. But of course, as soon as they talked about hurrying up to get somewhere, I immediately thought of the military. There is a culture of hurry up and wait in the military. If you're not familiar with this, lucky you. Um, but you'll have to be somewhere at 04 in the morning. You're sitting at the flight line on the tarmac for 3 hours for, a flight that isn't even going to come for 2 more hours, just to make sure that you're there in time, all just eating time.
Yeah, there's so much inefficiency built into that profession, which is totally the opposite of what the general public thinks about, military precision and things like that. But it's true. There's
It's
a
so
lot
true.
of waiting.
Yes. So this investigation that I'm referring to, it said that idle time between meetings, between assignments, between all these other responsibilities that you have at work tallied up to be $100 billion a year in lost wages. That's
Wow.
that's how much it costs in idle time.
But it isn't just the idle time that causes problems, right? I
No.
mean, that's a contributor 100%. But another thing that contributes to time poverty are the menial administrative tasks that are not central or necessary to someone's job function. Think about when you go to the doctor and how much time they spend talking to you and examining you, but then they also have to spend time sitting like in my case, my guy's got his computer right there in the office. He sits at the computer and fills out a bunch of paperwork and the billing information and record
Yeah.
keeping, right? And that takes away from time with the patient.
Right. It's the scut work, I think is what it's
Mhm,
referred to with
mhm.
with physicians. Yeah, exactly. It's doing all the administrative work. So, talking about your situation right there, I was thinking in my head about how the doctor looks at you, then they go back to this thing, they go back to the form, then they talk
Mhm,
to you, and then they go
mhm,
back to the form.
mhm.
Task switching,
Oh,
right?
yeah, uh-huh,
We all like to frame it as, oh, I'm multitasking. You're not multitasking, jack squat. You are task switching, and it is not efficient.
and we see that in the workplace when an employer has the employees jumping from one task to the next,
Mhm.
right? It eats at our time because it takes time. It takes
Yes.
about 25 minutes for us to cognitively recover when we shift between tasks, especially ones that are stress inducing or that require detailed attention,
Mhm.
right? And this has some deleterious effects on the workforce because it undermines an employee's sense of control over their time.
Right. And we're saying the employer, but sometimes it's just the nature of the beast. Like my full-time job is like largely like head down work, like I'm writing.
Mhm.
But then I'm also like the reference librarian, figurative one, right? Where
Right.
I'm like answering questions about things that I'm writing on. And I'm
Sure.
like up and then I'm like back down trying to write this thing and I have to reread the whole thing over again. Yeah.
Mhm. Mhm.
And interestingly, or not so interestingly, is that we have a bunch of coping tactics at work that are actually very counterproductive. I know that I have employees that tend to speed up their work pace or they shorten the amount of time they're spending on one activity. My personal favorite is if I know I'm about to be interrupted, that I do not go back into that long 23-page document to start reading it again because I know I'm just going to get interrupted again. So
Right. Well, and that goes to your point earlier about having that extra 6 minutes between meetings.
yeah.
I'm in the same boat you are, right? I've got documents I have to revise. I've got materials I have to review and release. And if I don't have the time to sit down and do that job start to finish, well, I'm not even going to start on it.
Yeah, it's head down work, right? You
Right.
need your head down to do it. Yes,
Right.
absolutely.
And this probably isn't a surprise to anyone, but it's not just corporate America that causes problems. Governments also contribute to time poverty. Think about the last time, this is pretty comical. Think about the last time you needed a permit or a license or assistance from the government in any way. What was your experience like?
I'm actually currently standing in line to renew my license at the DMV. I've been here all day.
And
No,
see,
I'm just kidding.
I know that's not true because there's not people shouting in the background. That's been my experience every time I've gone to the DMV.
This
But
microphone is that sensitive.
you've
Such a
got
good
like
microphone.
a cone of silence around you. It's awesome.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Like dogs wear after they've been.
But that's the typical experience. Long lines, long wait times, lots of paperwork.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I don't think anyone's going to be shocked to know that the federal government wastes their time, but they might be shocked as to how much the government wastes their time. So
Mm,
I got some fun facts for you.
mhm,
Being a federal worker,
mhm.
being someone who demands paperwork out of people, I am part of the problem. So in 2015, federal government paperwork costs US citizens 9.78 billion hours. And if you're like, well, how much
That's
money is that?
that's
It's
incredible.
$215 billion a year in lost wages because
That's
of
when you start
government
talking
paperwork,
about billions of anything, and it's such an unfathomable number
right?
that it really isn't even impactful because it just seems silly.
Right, exactly. You're like, okay, tell me it affects me 13 hours a week, and I'm like, now I'm in. But
Right.
9
9.78 billion hours.
billion
Yeah,
hours, like, what
that's
can I
just
do with that?
that's comical.
Yeah. So in there's a government agency, the U.S. Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs, and of course, it
Ooh,
has a acronym. I think it's I don't know. I always say OIDA. That's not right. Those are French fries.
Aura?
It's OIRA.
Sure, we'll go with that. Yeah, we'll go with
Yeah, whatever. 2019, they estimated
that.
that paperwork burdens had grown to 11.6 billion hours. So what's that? In 4 years, it goes up
2
a
billion.
couple more
Yeah.
billion,
Yeah,
couple more
basically 2 billion
billion.
hours.
Yeah. And
That's an insane amount.
it is insane amount. Yes.
And I want to make the point because it's in my schooling now that this sort of burden isn't distributed evenly.
Mm-mm.
Independent evaluations of government economic programs indicate that the burden of administrative paperwork is disproportionately placed on the poor, harming the very people that these programs are intended to help.
Oh, yeah.
For example, you've got low and middle income citizens that are eligible to obtain the earned income tax credit.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they're required to fill out long, complex application forms and to provide numerous documents such as records of all their expenses like rent and groceries.
Right. At some point, you're like, is this even worth it? You're like,
Right.
this is
Well, and for a
ridiculous.
lot of people, they bypass those benefits, the things that they're eligible for, because they don't have the time to do it.
Right. Exactly. Or they're just like, it's probably going to get bounced back to me
Sure.
some level of hoop I'm going to have to jump
I
through.
didn't dot some I or cross some T somewhere.
Absolutely. So I'm going to bring up one that definitely disproportionately affects folks, and I'll get to that in a second. But
Huh.
this one affects all of us. It's the commute times.
Oh yeah.
Now, granted, we're supposed to be going away from this as we all are able to work closer to home and in our homes and in our jammy pants. But globally, employees spend about 300 hours each year traveling between work and home. That's like 10% of your total working time is just spent in a car. And not everyone has access to this amazing podcast that can help bridge.
No, that's not true. Well, no, you're right. Not everyone has access to it.
That's right. Not
Yeah.
everyone. No, those people on those rickshaws are probably not like, hold on a
Yeah.
second.
We need to get Wi-Fi to developing nations.
right? Just for this podcast. So they can be
Yeah.
like, damn, that has a name.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Hey,
exactly.
Bill Gates, come on, let's get on this.
There you go.
And, I'm going to keep beating this drum, but similar to paperwork burdens, commute times are not equally distributed across the income spectrum.
Right. That's exactly where I was going with this. Keep
Yeah.
going. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So the census data that was conducted by the District of Columbia's Office of Revenue Analysis shows that the commute time for low income working adults is 120 minutes more per week than the commute time for higher paid workers. 2 hours.
Well, those longer commute times, they reduce the amount of time that I can use to search for better employment or complete non-work activities. Basically, a longer commute time means I am missing out on things that I could use for life satisfaction, basically. I mean, just sum it up.
Absolutely. And this will come as no surprise to anyone. But there's research that says that the more time spent commuting, the more you experience feelings of time poverty.
Right. The more you feel like there just simply are not enough waking hours in the day to fit everything in.
Mm-hmm.
And we've discussed previously how longer commutes negatively affect our overall happiness, right? It just makes us cranky pants. I mean,
does.
it
It
just
does.
does.
So we've just touched on two instances of how time poverty unfairly affects lower income folks. But when we start looking at time poverty in terms of who picks up all the slack in a household, this disproportionately affects women.
Right. I don't think this is going to come of any shock to our listeners, but I did want to make the point that time poverty at home especially affects women in lower economic brackets.
Mhm.
Caregiving tasks across the board are almost always done by women, even if they live with a partner.
Right.
And yes, there are asterisks to this. We're not saying that only women can take care of the caretaking task, but
Sure.
generally speaking, globally, this is what is happening. So, and for families that can't pay for caretakers for children or the elderly or the ill in their family, all that childcare, the various appointments, that can eat up an inordinate amount of time for sure.
Right. The time poverty that results from the hidden load of these household management tasks, they drive women, and particularly, like you said, the female caregivers out of the workforce, or it funnels them into lower paying jobs.
Right.
And in higher income households, unless you think they're unaffected, you have what's referred to as cognitive time poverty, right? They're not actually doing the things in a lot of cases, but they're coordinating it, and they're managing it, and they're making sure that like I said, all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed. They're basically orchestrating all these things to happen.
Right. Exactly. That too does not just magically come together.
Right.
Right. It's like a symphony. The triangle just don't know when to come in. You got to
Right.
signal it and be like,
Right.
your turn, a little higher on the
right.
bass.
That's
Yeah,
right.
exactly. So, we started off talking about the pandemic, and I know in human resources, we're just studying this now, the toll that the pandemic took. And interestingly, labor market participation among women dropped to its lowest in 30 years during the pandemic because women were just struggling with the demands of both work and family, and they finally ended up just quitting.
Sure.
So,
But even pre-pandemic, a lack of time was a serious problem for women, especially women who have children.
oh yeah, I mean, the rule of thumb is that if you're in a developed country, women spend twice as many hours per day on unpaid working. So that's cooking, cleaning, caring for children as their male counterparts. And then if you're in a developing world, like a country that's on the rise, now you're up to 3.4 times as much work falling on the women
Wow.
as their male counterparts. Division of labor is just very different.
Yeah, very skewed, right?
Skewed. That's a
Yeah.
good way. Yes.
In some cases, this would be because of fixed gender expectations around what work women quote unquote should do.
Mm-hmm.
And in other cases, the inequalities are more subtle. So for many women, extra time is consumed by the hidden load. We hinted at this a second ago. That's the emotional and cognitive labor women shoulder, such as, and I'm gonna rattle off. I'm gonna get listy here. I know we don't like getting listy, but I'm gonna get listy.
I can't wait to hear your list.
Yeah.
I can't wait to hear what you think is encompassed in this hidden load. Go.
So women shoulder meal planning, organizing play dates if you have children,
Okay.
being in charge of remembering every single family member's birthday,
And great gift ideas.
Right, right. And right,
Yes.
and purchasing and
And
mailing
who wants what?
and making those gifts happen. Keeping the school's handbook in your head, all the schedules of each family member, what household items we're running low on, ensuring that babysitters are lined up and reservations are made, the unending hell that is laundry, all things that fail to get captured in economic terms. And look, as someone who's been part of a household system and has also lived on his own,
Mhm.
I recognize how little I think I was contributing when I was part of a system, and
Mhm.
I regret that. Like at this point, all those things fall on me, and I 100% cop to not being able to maintain all of that myself.
Right. It's a lot.
Yeah,
Well, it's part of that hidden load, right? It's
yeah,
hard to juggle it all. It absolutely is.
hmm
I like how you said about it gets failed to get captured in economic terms, because that's what I would like to discuss, because
hmm
that's usually how we capture work, right? If you exchange my services for dollars, then it gets captured.
right. Then it
But
counts, quote unquote.
it
It counts,
counts.
right?
Yes, then it's a real job. But if there's no exchange, then it just seems to get lost in the sauce. You're right.
And I think we've all seen that meme now that shows how much it would cost to hire someone or a host of someone's maybe to
Yeah.
do all the things that I just rattled off, right? And that's really honestly I came across that, which kind of spurred me to suggest this topic as something that we discuss on the pod. But you have like a live-in nanny, a personal chef, a gift concierge, laundry, et cetera, et cetera. It produces some astronomical number, like $500,000 or something.
Hmm. Yeah. So that meme I always look at it kind of like with a skeptical eye,
I,
because
well, I know when I brought it to you, you were like, yeah, but
yeah, but because I'm like, really? I'm like, I don't know that me running the kids to all of their appointments and their sports and what have you is like the equivalent of me needing my own driver, if you
Mhm,
will. But the point is, I think that we're both making is that hidden load is just hidden. The work gets done, but it's just sort of in the ether.
right. I love thinking of it that way as the magic that happens behind the scenes,
Hmm.
right? And let's say that you're one of these people who make that magic happen,
Hmm.
and you want to get some sort of I don't know, recognition for what you're doing.
Hmm.
Bringing up the efforts that you make toward that hidden load, it often looks and sound like kvetching.
Hmm. Hmm.
If I say to you, I'm doing all of these things,
Hmm.
the message is often received as you aren't doing any of these things,
Right.
right? And that makes for a very awkward and difficult conversation, right? And those conversations around the emotional labor honestly just add to the load that people carry. It's one more thing on the to-do list.
Hmm. So it's interesting that you framed it as wanting recognition of it, because I don't even know if it's recognition. I think it's just that I want, I think people just needed to know that it exists, that it needs to be recognized, period.
Yeah,
That it's just these are these other things that are going on that are somehow being magically performed, and they
right.
do take such a toll.
Mhm.
But this whole thing about the economic thing, and this might be a little bit tangential, and
Okay.
Pete, unfortunately, I think what's coming up. So this just
So
popped
it's
up in
so
my
weird for us to get tangential. Go ahead.
this just popped up in my LinkedIn feed this week.
Mhm.
And I thought, oh, I think this is here for a reason again. You know what I'm talking about? What was my thing this week about my
Oh, you're talking about Joshua Bell. I know what you're
I'm
talking about.
talking about Joshua Bell. Yes, yes, yes. So for those of you who need a refresher on this, or who possibly haven't seen it, Joshua Bell, renowned violinist, he sells out venues that charge $100 a seat.
Uh-huh.
So the whole experiment, quote unquote, is that he plays in the subway for 45 minutes and he nets $30 in tips. And of course, everyone's like, oh, there's so many like little coffee cup wisdoms that get spun out on this, right? Like,
Mhm.
oh, he's not appreciated because he only got $30 in tips. And then, of course, it's like always hosted by some like staffing agency. If you too are not appreciated at work, click here and look for another job. Um, but I always find this to be such a short-sighted experiment. And
Mhm.
I am going to tell everyone else why, because I know that you
Oh,
already know
yeah.
why.
Oh, no, please, please go ahead.
So it goes to saying that we feel like we can only show our appreciation through monetary compensation.
Hmm.
And or the only way that I feel value is if I receive money for my services,
Hmm.
which is not true at all. I think there's so many other variables that are not captured by that experience. Like how many people felt inspired by the music that day? How many people told a friend what they had witnessed, thereby passing on some good vibes? How many people from that point on committed to carrying small bills with them to tip a street performer who had stirred their soul? There's lots of things to say that his actions don't count, if you will, because he only got $30 in tips. I think that's ridiculous. And I think it's
Sure.
applicable here.
And it goes back to what we just said about that unpaid labor doesn't count if it doesn't
Right.
have money attached to it.
Right.
And you're putting this guy who's this phenomenal performer. And I think that said something about him playing on some like $1 million instrument.
Yes.
It,
Yes.
you're putting him in a subway where famously people don't go to hang out, right? Like,
Not people who have money just to tip,
no,
people. Right.
right,
Yeah. You're
right.
hanging out there.
That's a place of
Yeah.
transition. People are going places. They're not like, oh, that sounds nice. I've got 15 minutes to blow. Why don't I just stand here and listen to the violin player?
Right. And
It's
here I
just a
am.
weird social experiment.
It is. And the whole spare cash to tip a violin virtuoso, especially in today's.
Who carries cash even? And just, I know we're being a little bit silly right now, but I would just want to make sure that we're driving the point home here. We're not saying that the answer is just to be more appreciative, right? In the way that people could have been super appreciative to hear him play that day, right?
Right. Just being appreciative doesn't lessen the load, but appreciation is a start.
Mhm.
Because if you can appreciate the hidden load, it means you've seen it, you've recognized it, and that's a starting point for a conversation.
Right. It's actually kind of like the first step to fixing a problem is acknowledging that there is a problem.
I think this is a great point in time to then talk about the repercussions of time poverty, because
Uh-huh.
we've now been like, hey, you need to see it. But also, I don't think everyone realizes how they're being impacted by time poverty. Some people might be like, oh, it doesn't affect me. I don't
Sure.
magically make the toilets clean.
Right.
So, but it does. It
Right.
affects society at large for sure.
Yeah. So individual people will experience the feeling that days are passing by too quickly. Time poverty leads to poor sleep, burnout, depression. For some, the health impacts can be even more significant. You can feel overwhelmed by domestic responsibilities, which has been shown to cause women to delay seeking medical care. There's one study that I saw that showed that over a quarter of American women had put off or not sought healthcare within the last 12 months due to a lack of time.
I believe that
A
100%.
year, a year.
Yeah.
That is
I will make sure the
insane.
dog has her shots before I go to my annual. Yes, exactly.
Right,
100%.
right.
Yeah.
Because you're so busy coordinating everyone else's stuff, you don't
Mhm.
have time to take care of yourself. And there's also evidence that time poverty promotes unhealthy eating habits, which shouldn't be a surprise, and decreases
Right.
exercise, which shouldn't be a surprise. Those who are time poor experience much lower levels of well-being.
Right. It all becomes this very circular sort of thing.
Mhm.
Yeah. So I have in my notes here that there was it was a survey done by Go Banking Rates.
Okay.
I know, of all the places, but
Uh-huh.
yeah, interestingly, it said 28% of participants reported that their side hustles were negatively affecting their mental and physical health,
Uh-huh.
okay, increasing their stress, challenging their work-life balance, straining their personal relationships. So, didn't we say before 25%
Yep.
of Americans? So, a
25%,
quarter,
right, have that side hustle.
that's a quarter of American population with some sort of side hustle that is now being like pushed to the brink. And how many people are they impacting?
Right.
They're impacting spouses, significant
Children,
others,
right, other family
children,
members, sure.
other family members. Yeah.
Roommates. I mean,
Yes.
there's no shortage of it could even be affecting people at your normal day job.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Oh, God. Yeah. You come in all bleary eyed because you've been up coding.
Yep.
Yep. Now
Yeah,
you're trying to
absolutely.
operate a machine. Good Lord.
Or
Help us.
researching stuff for a pod. Yeah.
Yeah. Not like that's not a, yeah.
That would never happen.
It's not
And
like that's not our side hustle. Good
and
Lord.
those all those working hours actually, like, I can put numbers to this, how they're dangerous. The World Health Organization did a study that said that working at least 55 hours a week kills more, ready? Kills
Yeah.
more than 745,000 people a year.
Because they're working over 55 hours or
Three
more?
three quarters of a million people, they say,
What?
die because they've worked over 55 hours a week. And they come to this conclusion by asserting that working too much increases the risk of stroke by 35% and increases the risk of heart disease by 17%. And that problem is only getting worse as more and more people work longer and longer hours.
Yeah. And as you alluded to before, not that losing people at work isn't an organizational impact, but what I was saying, if you come in sort of like bleary eyed or whatever,
Mhm.
like you have organizational impacts at work.
100%. 100%. Research suggests that the individual impacts that we just talked about,
Hmm.
we talked about, poor sleep, poor diet, that cause employees to make more mistakes at work,
Yeah.
right? And it ends up costing businesses more in health insurance because they're not sleeping and they're not eating right and they're not exercising.
Hmm.
It costs them in high turnover and it
Yes,
costs them in more sick days.
for sure. Yeah. And then, just when you think about health as an overarching sort of schema, you have that lack of ability to explore interests outside of the obligatory responsibilities like work or family care. Like you're
Right.
missing out on leisure activities that can support a healthy quality of life.
Right. But it also isn't just the downtime and a chance to explore your interests and your hobbies that the particularly time poor are missing out on. Okay.
Hmm.
They're also missing out on opportunities to improve their life circumstances.
Hmm.
Parents who are also students, so people who are in school that have children, are
Okay.
less likely than their childless peers to complete college.
I believe
And
it.
and individuals with children under the age of 13 spend much less time on education, with experts specifically pointing to time poverty as the primary cause.
Yeah. Well, the time impoverished struggle to carve out the hours they need, right? They just don't have the hours to make better employment decisions or in some cases to make good financial decisions. You don't have the time to like look into all of your options and weigh
Mhm.
them out. All of that takes a considerable amount of time.
Sure. And then people become trapped in this vicious cycle, right?
Mhm.
Their low income makes them time poor, right? They've got the longer commutes, they've got all the things that we've already discussed. But the lack of time stops them from improving their economic circumstances.
Right.
So while people hustle to make their ends meet, they're actually hindering their advancement into potentially better situations.
Which ultimately results in a wage gap. And when you
Right.
have less disposable income, you have less ability to buy yourself some time capacity.
Right. And I believe that the going term for what you're trying to allude to is leverage. You
Yes.
can't buy more time. That's a resource that we can't grasp like that. But you can sell your available hours to someone else. Right. And if you have someone who cuts your grass for you or cleans your house or runs errands, picks up your cleaning, you have leveraged their time on your behalf.
And this would explain why an Elon Musk is able to spend 100 hours a week at work. It's not that he's cracked the code on how to bend time. It's just that he is absolved from 20 to 30 hours a week of minutia.
Right. So let's talk about how to work to combat this. Okay. One of the primary ways that we can be relieved of this burden is to lessen the amount of time it takes to complete unpaid work.
Sure. Right. Absolutely. So I know in all of the studies that I read and the research that I read, the articles, they talked about like how the washing machine, right? That's
Mhm.
one of those things. It lessens the amount of time to complete unpaid work. So you
Sure.
have advances in machinery and technology. But I think before we create a new washing machine, just simply having a conversation about reallocating the workload would go a very long way. Recognizing it and then having a discussion about who can shoulder some of that hidden workload.
Absolutely. Given the technology that we have, we're so far advanced from where people 100 years were as far as having the ability to have the maximum amount of free time, and yet we still don't. And
Right,
it's really a matter of taking the people that are shouldering the majority of the burden and spreading that out, making it a team effort.
right.
We can also be more cognizant of how we're spending our time,
Mhm.
right? Last season, we talked about scheduling and how people arrange their day. And we know that some of our most successful people, such as Thomas Edison, Albert Einstein, they track their time with a log of what they were doing every 15 minutes from the time they got up to the time they went to bed. And that helped them see where their time was being devoted and gave them the opportunity to make changes that allowed them to prioritize their more important items.
Yes. And realizing when you do have that time that is being wasted for you, that has been pre-programmed like into your day, the time in between the meetings or whatever.
Right.
Yeah. I actually have my to-do list arranged in sort of, I think of them in terms of bites. And I hate saying that because it gets us back to season 1 where we talked about eating frogs and elephants and what have you. But there are some things that are
Such
like
good memories.
small bites, right? You know, that I'm like, what can I do right now? There are some tasks that are small bites. And I try to fit those in when I have the opportunity. So I'm not saddled with a bunch of little bites when I get back to my desk. I don't want to spend my hour doing little bites. I'd rather spend the 6 minutes that it's going to take to get some of those things done.
Yeah. But we also have to acknowledge how we don't even have the opportunity a lot of times to work on those big bite items, those large uninterrupted swaths of time. Right? We're constantly interrupted by our devices, by our email, by people stopping by our desk. We're constantly getting interrupted by things.
Right. What we're referring to is actually this has got a name too. This is called time confetti. But you know, there are things we can do to ensure that we are not being interrupted every 5 seconds by a device.
Sure. I love that name. It's so precise in what it's describing because we all carry with us, everyone in this country at least, carries with us these devices that notify us all the time about other things to look at. A typical hour, we break up our chunk of time into 2 minutes to look at Facebook, and then 10 minutes reading and responding to an email, and then 5 minutes of just seeing what the latest hot takes on Twitter are. And before you know it, your free hour is gone.
Right. And that's how you get to time confettiing people, because all of those notifications take any free time you have and they just shred it to tiny pieces. And now you got a vacuum, damn it.
Yeah. You just made a mess of an hour.
Right.
And it's also important to point out that we undervalue our time. I saw a survey where 52% of the people that were surveyed were financially comfortable, but extremely time poor. And if you're wondering who these people are, I'm thinking the double income families with children.
Yeah.
52% said they'd rather have more money than more time, and asked how they would spend a hypothetical $100 prize to increase their happiness. Only 2% of these people said that they would spend the money to save time, such as having grocery delivered.
Well, I can understand this because I don't want anybody else picking on my produce. Like nobody picks broccoli like me. I'm just saying. So that would make me angry because then I would feel like I got to go do it and you took my money. Like I got to go do it myself.
Fill in the blanks for some other time-saving measure. But the
Yes.
point is, people were more interested in having the money than having the time.
Yes.
And as we alluded to at the very top of the episode, we have such a thing for staying busy.
Oh yeah. Busyness at work carries status, man. We wear it like a badge of honor, right? We want to be seen as that employee. We're like, oh, I'm so loyal. I'm working the longest hours. You know, even when those hours are not productive. That's what's crazy.
Well, and research shows that employees who boast about working nonstop and being extremely busy are seen by their coworkers as being better workers who have more money and prestige, even if they don't. They're even thought, and I can't believe this, but they're even thought to be more physically attractive.
People who are busy?
Yeah.
Are,
Yeah.
What's that? Like haggard is the new black? Like the
I mean, I guess. I don't know.
Crazy.
And the let's see, the conjoined twin, I don't know if that's too awkward to say, of our love of business is that we also don't appreciate idleness.
Yeah.
Idleness has been shown to be a valuable form of leisure time that increases our feelings of time affluence.
Oh, sure. If we feel like it's time well spent, we don't feel like we squandered it.
Right.
No, I mean, there's definitely studies on this. The physical, mental benefits of disengaging the brain are far more valuable than keeping the mind engaged at all times, right? You need those breaks in order to jump back into the double dutch.
Right.
You know?
Right.
Yeah.
Then this is the last one, I think. We think that we will have more time tomorrow than we do today.
What is this saying? The trouble is you think you have time.
Yes. Or in this case, you think that you will have time.
Right. And statistically, the best predictor of how busy you're going to be next week is how busy we are right now. Our minds frequently forget this important point and trick us into believing that we'll have more time later on than we do now. And this over optimism, and perhaps I'm just projecting here, means that we're very cavalier with our yeses, even for like small stuff we don't want to do. We're like, yes, I'll do that. Thinking like, oh, that's next Tuesday.
Yeah, sure. Next Tuesday, that week's going to be great.
Yeah.
And saying yes has other benefits for us. We see it as a way to overcome idleness, which we've already discussed isn't seen as a virtue, right? We're able to feel productive. We're able to feel connected, valued, respected, even loved if we say yes.
Sure. Essentially, what we were saying is that our society and our psychology makes these time traps, these contributors to time poverty, very appealing.
And as we've seen, there are multiple forces at work at any one given time. So it's no wonder that we feel so depleted.
However, in identifying some of these forces by calling them out by name, we can work towards having some time surplus.
And look, we both realize that simply staying off your devices while you're trying to finish a work report is not going to somehow make up for the 20 extra hours of household load that you carry on your back each week.
No, I mean, Pete's right. Yes. But if you aren't that person saddled with that extra workload, here is your opportunity to observe, engage, and get into the game to see where you can work to alleviate that oppression. And I'm going to call it as such.
So working toward that time affluence is about recognizing and overcoming the time traps in our lives and intentionally carving out happier and more meaningful moments each day.
Right. No matter what time affluence looks like for you, the happiest and most time affluent among us are those who are very deliberate with their free time, which means that they have free time to be deliberate with.
Right. And so we all need, or we all should, identify the things that bring us joy, that are important to us, that are going to contribute to our well-being, and commit to them with the same fervor that we do all these other tasks that we've talked about, right? Commit to protecting that leisure time.
Right. And so in addition to committing to protecting that leisure time, work together to lighten each other's load, because life is a team sport, people. It really is.
Well, that's absolutely well said. Teamwork makes the dream work.
And on that note, why don't we wrap up this very long session in which we talk about time poverty by making it our longest episode ever?
Yeah, well, okay.
What a way to send out season 2, right? Right, Pete?
The irony.
The irony.
So Melissa and I would love to continue this discussion with you all on social media. Do you feel like you're dealing with time poverty?
Do you feel like you're dealing with time poverty after listening to us wax poetic about time poverty?
You can break us up into smaller chunks and listen to us when you have time. It's fine.
What unpaid labor tasks take up the most of your time? Have you noticed that your time gets shredded by social media and email? Have you ever leveraged money to get back some, or to add more time to your day, let's say? Reach out and let us know what you're thinking.
You can find us on Twitter and Instagram at ThinkSigPod, and on Facebook and LinkedIn by searching for Think Significantly.
And if you enjoyed our conversation, please rate and review us on your podcast platform and invite your curious friends to listen. And as we said, this is our last episode of this season, and we both would like to sincerely thank you for the support that we've gotten last season, this season. Yeah. Pete and I will be back next season, lots of seasons here, with more thought-provoking conversations.
And until then, we wish everyone a safe and prosperous rest of this year. And we encourage everyone to think significantly about the world around you.